With us now to talk about the potential impact of cuts, should they happen, former Chief of Defense Staff General Tom Lawson. He's now the director of the board of Millet Air Incorporated and has a private defense consulting business. General Lawson, pleasure to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Vassy.
I know you to be a less political person than lots of others in this town, but I had to start with a question about kind of the very public statement from the Chief of Defense Staff, followed by the Prime Minister today, which really seemed to be at odds with what General Eyre had said. This kind of public back and forth, how rare is it from where you sit?
Well, I think the concern that the government has now is the blowback regarding a significant cut, $1 billion to the military, doesn't seem to be playing well, and I think for very good reason. Can expect a lot out of their military. They know they haven't invested heavily in the military, and the military is under a lot of requirement to support allies in places like Latvia, also Canadians and Canadian safety right here in Canada. So this wasn't going to play well almost from the start, and now the communication is really kind of focused on how do you take some money out of defense and still get the idea across to Canadians that you're investing more, and those two things don't connect very well.
Yeah, I was going to say, how difficult is it to reconcile that? And is there $1 billion to find through outsourcing contracts and travel?
Well, to your first point, it's very tough, and I'll tell you why. Successive governments for decades have been taking deep defense discounts. We have a really good armed forces. It's extremely small. You know, our 1.3 gross domestic product, percent of gross domestic product that's invested is significantly lower than certainly our NATO allies and our NORAD ally, the United States, would like to see us at. And it hasn't happened recently. It's been over many years. So, with that in mind, that significant cuts have already been made, it's going to be very tough. And we should listen very carefully to what the Chief of Defense and his Deputy Minister said. This will be tough. Now, the fact is that more money is going to go into defense as a result of procurement spending that's coming along in the next few years for new ships and airplanes and vehicles that have been required to be replaced. So there's a certain amount of truth to that as well. There is more money going into defense, but there's no doubt about it. When you look for $1 billion out of the operations budget and contractors, by the way, these contractors are really important men and women who are overseeing a lot of things that defense has decided not to do for themselves in recent years because of previous budget cuts.
So let me ask you from kind of like a 50-foot view. You've been on this program many times to talk about how since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO allies in particular have doubled down on spending at defense. Even many allies that weren't anywhere close to spending 2% of their GDP on defense have certainly upped that throughout the last 18 months. In July, we met with our allies in Vilnius, and everyone agreed to an enduring commitment to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, and Canada was among those who did. Do you think there's any world in which you do $1 billion of cuts in defense and this doesn't come back at you through your allies in some capacity in this current context?
No, I think it's tough to expect that the allies will read into it and be patient. I mean, we read articles that have just come out in The Economist. They've picked up on it. Our NATO allies and the United States have picked up. I'm hearing stories back through my contacts in the military that this is not being received well by any of our allies. You know, it becomes very confusing to them that a couple of months ago, everything was on an upward swing towards more defense and our, renewed commitment to our alliance. And now this. It's very difficult for them to understand, and it suggests to them that we're really not serious about defense and our alliances.
And may I ask, as someone who oversaw, was kind of the leader of all these thousands of people in the military, from that vantage point, how this might be internalized by them at this point in time. Another message from another government, and to be fair, like you said, it is not just this one. There's been many of different party stripes previously, saying, the plan is essentially, ultimately, although the wording is back and forth, to spend less.
Right. So I think it's very disheartening. And in fact, actually, you've put your finger on what I'm most concerned about. I'm not as concerned about recruiting new young Canadian men and women. I understand there's some lineups at our recruiting center doors, metaphorically. Most of it's done online now. What I'm really concerned about, those men and women who have become trained in their occupations and trade, are very good, and in many cases have been in 5, 10, 15 years and are training our new recruits. If they're disheartened about this
Right.
loss of faith that they feel is being demonstrated by the government, and they decide to get out, and by the way, there's a lot of jobs there for good young men and women who have all of the skills that have been provided to them by the armed forces, then I think we're in a much tougher spot, where then we'd be losing really experienced men and women in uniform.
Okay, General Lawson, I'll leave it on that point. Thank you so much for your insights this evening. Appreciate them.
Thanks for having me, Vassy.